Good afternoon, Virgo. Don't be surprised, is an interesting thing to say. When you are about to describe something, that would naturally produce surprise in almost anyone who experienced it without prior warning. And I want to explain why I say it anyway. Before anything else, because the reason matters for how you receive everything that follows. Don't be surprised. Not because what is coming is ordinary. It is not ordinary. Not because miracles are expected. They are not expected. They are miracles precisely because they are not. Don't be surprised. Because surprise in the specific form of shock and disbelief can actually interfere with the receiving of the extraordinary thing that has arrived. By directing your attention away from the experience of the thing and toward the experience of being surprised by it, which are two different experiences, and only one of them is the full and complete receiving of what the miracle is offering. So the don't be surprised is a preparation for the receiving rather than a diminishment of the extraordinariness of what is coming, which is fully extraordinary and fully worth the stop in your regular programming. That receiving it fully will require welcome and be ready. I want to start by describing what miracles actually are. In the real and grounded sense, that makes them receivable, rather than only waiting for able, which is the state most people are in. In relation to miracles, most of the time, when they are hoping for something extraordinary to happen, but are not quite in the state of active receiving, that the extraordinary requires to land fully in their life rather than partially or peripherally. A miracle is not a violation of the natural order. It is not something that happens despite the way things work or outside the mechanics of how cause and effect operates in the real and ordinary world. A miracle is a specific arrangement of the mechanics of how things work that produces an outcome that the ordinary mechanics of things do not typically produce without the specific arrangement that the miracle required to arrive in the form it arrived. Whew. The mechanics are not suspended for a miracle. The mechanics are used in a specific and uncommon combination that produces what could not be produced by any of the mechanics individually or in the ordinary combinations that produce ordinary results. And the specific and uncommon combination that produces a miracle is usually triggered by something in the person who receives it rather than by something external to them that has no relationship to their own state or their own openness or their own readiness for the specific form that the miracle is going to take. What triggers miracles in people is the specific state of being open to receiving something that is larger than what was expected without the defended and managed response to something unexpectedly large that most people's psychological systems default to when something bigger than expected arrives without adequate preparation. I want to describe that state more specifically because understanding what the open state actually is and what it feels like from inside will help you recognize when you are in it and when you are not, and therefore help you maintain it. In the period after this watching, when the ordinary tends to pull people back out of the open state and into the defended one, before what was made possible by the opening has had time to fully arrive, the open state feels like a specific quality of availability to whatever is arriving, rather than to the version of what is arriving that the defended state was prepared to receive. The defended state has a template for what is likely to arrive based on previous experience, and it filters what arrives against that template before allowing it in the form it actually is, rather than in the form the template expected, which is sometimes a smaller form than what was actually arriving. Before the filtering, the open state has no template, or rather, it allows the template to be temporarily suspended in the service of receiving what actually arrives, rather than what the template predicted would arrive. And in that temporary suspension of the template, things that could not arrive through the template because they did not match what the template was designed to receive can arrive directly in their actual form, which is the miracle form of something that exceeds what was expected, because expectations were not in that moment limiting what could arrive. The watching creates the temporary suspension of the template in the specific way that readings of this kind create it by addressing you in the full and specific form of where you actually are, rather than where the template would expect you to be. And the full and specific addressing temporarily suspends the template because the template was not designed for this level of specific and accurate addressing of exactly where you actually are. Is the preparation that is adequate for the receiving of what is coming in the form of the miracle that arrives after the watching, not because the reading is itself magical, but because the reading is producing in you right now, as you watch, the specific state of openness that the miracle requires to land fully, rather than to arrive and be managed into something smaller by the defended response that would have met it without this preparation. I want to describe what the miracles look like in the specific forms they are going to take in your life after this watching, because describing them in advance is part of what allows you to recognize them when they arrive, rather than having them arrive and be misidentified as coincidence or as luck or as something ordinary. That happened to be more favorable than usual, without the particular recognition of something extraordinary that deserves to be received as such. The first miracle is relational. Something shifts in a connection that has been important to you in the direction you have been hoping it would shift, without having been able to produce the shift through direct effort or direct communication, or any of the ordinary means by which people try to move the connections in their lives in the directions they want them to move. The shift arrives without your having produced it in the spontaneous and self-organizing form of something that moved when the conditions became right for it to move, rather than when sufficient effort was applied to make it move. And the conditions becoming right were partly a function of the state you are in now, after the watching, which is the state of openness that allows things around you to move more naturally than they can move when the state is defended and managed and resistant to the movement, because of the particular way defended states transmit themselves to the connections around them and produce corresponding resistance in what they are in connection with. The second miracle is material. Something arrives in the practical dimension of your life that was not specifically expected, or not expected in this form, or not expected at this particular time, from this particular direction, in the form of resources or opportunities, or the specific loosening of something that had the quality of constraint in the period that preceded this one, and that now releases in the particular way of something that was always going to release when the conditions were right for the releasing, which they now are in the state you are in after the watching. The material miracle is smaller than the relational one in most readings of this kind, because the relational dimension of life is where the largest things happen for most people, and the material dimension, while real and significant, is usually the secondary of the two dimensions, in which miracles first make themselves known. But do not dismiss the material miracle when it arrives as too small to be the thing the reading was describing, because the material miracle in its actual form is not small. It is proportionate to the state that produced it and to what was needed in the practical dimension of your life right now, in this specific season. The third miracle is the one that is hardest to name, because it is internal, and internal miracles do not have the visible external form that relational and material miracles have, and are therefore easier to dismiss as not really miraculous, because they cannot be pointed to in the concrete way of something that changed in the visible world. The internal miracle is this: something releases in you after the watching in the form of a weight that has been present in the particular quiet form of something that is simply there as a feature of how you carry yourself through the days without always being aware that it is there because it has been there long enough to feel like the ordinary texture of things rather than like something additional that is being carried on top of the ordinary texture, and that therefore has the quality of something that could be set down if it were recognized as something being carried rather than as the ordinary weight of things. The watching produces the recognition of the weight as something being carried rather than as the ordinary texture of things. And the recognition is the first movement of the setting down, which is the internal miracle that the watching enables in the specific form of something you were carrying, becoming identifiable as something you were carrying, rather than as simply how things are. For someone in your situation, now I want to speak about what prevents miracles, because I think this is the most important part of this message, and the part that is most directly affected by the specific act of watching this reading and being in the state the watching produces. Miracles are not prevented by unworthiness. I want to say that first, because unworthiness is what most people assume is the reason miracles have not arrived, or have not arrived in the form or the frequency that they were hoping for, as if miracles are distributed according to a merit system that the person hoping for them has not yet sufficiently satisfied. That is not how it works. Miracles are not withheld from the undeserving. They arrive when the conditions for their arrival are present, and the conditions are primarily internal rather than external. What actually prevents miracles is the specific configuration of internal conditions that makes the receiving of something extraordinary, impossible, or reduced before it has had the chance to land in its full and complete form. The first condition that prevents miracles is the defended state, the specific and understandable configuration of someone who has learned through previous experience that things which arrive looking like miracles are sometimes less than they appear on closer inspection or over time, and who has developed, in response to that learning, a managed and defended approach to receiving things that appear extraordinary. That protects against the potential disappointment of something proving less extraordinary than it initially appeared. The defended state is intelligent in its own domain, but it is also exactly what prevents the full landing of an actual miracle, because the miracle lands in the open space of an undefended receiver, and the defended state, however understandably constructed, is not that space. The watching of this reading creates the open space temporarily in the form of a full stop in the ordinary, where the defending is also temporarily suspended. Because what is being received in a reading of this kind does not trigger the defended response in the same way that incoming experience from the ordinary world usually does. And in that open space, the miracle can land in the full and complete form rather than in the defended and partial form that the defended state would have allowed before the watching created the open space that the full landing requires. Don't be surprised if miracles start to happen after this reading, because the reading has done what readings of this kind do. When they land correctly in someone who needed them at exactly the time they are arriving for exactly the purpose of creating the open space in which the extraordinary that was always going to arrive for them when the conditions were right finally can. I want to say something about the timing of this, because timing matters in the specific way that the when of a miracle is as important as the what of it. And I think you deserve to understand why this reading is arriving at this specific moment in your life, rather than at some earlier or later point when it might also have been available to you, but would not have landed in the same way or produced the same opening that this specific moment allows. The reading arrives now because this is the specific moment in your particular story when the open space that the reading produces corresponds to something that is actually ready to arrive in your actual life, rather than something that was approaching but had not yet formed enough to be ready for the arrival in the specific and complete form that makes it a miracle, rather than an early and partial version of the miracle that would have arrived before its full form was available. The timing of a reading and the timing of what it opens for are always connected, not coincidentally, but specifically in the way that the conditions that produce the opening and the conditions that allow what can come through the opening to be fully ready for arriving are both present at the same time, which is now you are in the right moment for everything this reading is opening for, and the miracles that are about to arrive are in their full and ready form for exactly this moment in exactly your life as it is configured right now. Now, after this reading, in the specific form of an open space where the defended state was before the watching began, and extraordinary things are already moving in the direction of that open space, as they always are, when the space becomes available for them to arrive in, rather than being deflected by the defended state that was present before. Don't be surprised, but also be fully present when they arrive in the full and open form that the reading created the space for, and let them land completely in the full size of what they actually are. And when they arrive, tell someone, not because the telling is mystically required, but because the telling anchors the miracle in the real and relational dimension of your life, where witness confirms what arrived and prevents the quiet shrinking of something extraordinary into something ordinary. That happens without witness. When the defended state reasserts itself and begins to explain away what arrived in the open space after it is closed again and the template returns, and the miracle must now fit into the template or be diminished by it. Witness keeps the miracle in its actual size because another person's knowing of it makes the diminishing harder than when only you know it happened and only you are holding the size of it against the returning pressure of the ordinary that wants everything to be ordinary size, including the extraordinary things that arrived when the ordinary was briefly suspended by the watching of a reading like this one. Tell someone about the miracle when it arrives in the specific and actual form it takes in your specific life, and let the telling be part of the receiving rather than only a report of what was already received, because the telling and the receiving are part of the same complete act of a miracle being fully honored by the person it arrived for. Into the open space that you created by stopping here and watching and being in the reading in the full and present form of someone who was ready to let something extraordinary land in their life in whatever form it comes. Don't be surprised. Be ready. The miracles are already on their way.